going to the target endpoints. Okay, so let me know once my screen is visible.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so yeah, so here in the target endpoint, basically we had previously covered in the past, just a revision. So target endpoint usually specifies the backend service, the one which we want to call, and if we want to modify the request response, those kind of things we usually put in the target endpoint section. But remember, it is all completely driven by the business requirement. It is not like hard and fast that we do that, but only based on the business requirement. Okay, we can attach such policies, and we specify the connection timeout, IO timeout, and all those stuff. Okay, and we can validate the status code and payload of the backend responses. Those kind of things we can put it in the target endpoint section. Okay, so usually within the proxy we have the target endpoint section. Now in so in within the proxy, the proxy endpoint part is actually mandatory. Okay, but target endpoint, it can be 0, it can be 1, it can be more than 1. Okay, so based on certain conditions and requirement, target endpoint section is like not mandatory, because in some cases you might want to go to backend, some cases you might not even want to. Okay, so that is why target endpoint section is not mandatory. Okay, now in many proxies we have one target also sometimes, but I have seen many places there can be more than one target endpoint also. Okay, so however, in a single API call, okay, when an API call comes in a single API call flow, only one target endpoint can be invoked. You cannot invoke both of them because the flow will not work like that. Okay, so as a from proxy to target, only one target endpoint can be invoked in the runtime. Okay, when the call comes. Now question is, in case of multiple targets, so when you have one target, you know, one to one, no problem. But now in case of multiple target, how Apigee or API will determine which target endpoint to select? So that information is usually stored in a section called route rule. In the proxy endpoint, we have a section called route rule, so that will define where to route. Okay, so there in the route rule we can define conditions. Okay, and based on condition which is successful, that specific target endpoint is selected. Okay, now if some cases we can even decide if this condition do not even go to target, that also is supported. Okay, so in Apigee, when we are defining route rule, so route rule is evaluated from top to down, top to bottom. Okay, so in the section top to down, so whichever is on the top, that condition will be evaluated first. Okay, now so when we are defining conditions, we need to make sure that those conditions do not overlap. Okay, first situation should be they should not overlap, and second thing, in case they overlap, the more restrictive condition, okay, more restrictive condition should be first, and generic condition should be in the bottom. Okay, because if generic condition is on the top, Apigee will not even go to the specific one. Okay, so more specific and more restrictive conditions, that should be first. And in case of route rules, usually the last one, in case we have multiple route rule, okay, in case of multiple route rule, the last one usually does not have any condition, because that becomes a default, because in Apigee you have to at least give one default option where it will go. So last one will be like default, so last one usually do not have any condition defined. Okay, because if none of them are matching, simply pick this route. Okay, evaluate or go to this route. Okay, now route rules, so this is what we usually define. So within the proxy route rules, so let's see here in this example, we see route rule name is first name is no target. This name is like anything you can give. Okay, this is like just a unique name for our understanding. So this name you can define anything. Important thing is, in the first scenario, you see this is the condition. If proxy.path suffix is like /auth, in that case do not go to any target. So in first condition, it will not pick any target. Apigee will start executing the response flow. It will not go to target. Proxy response flow itself, it will start. Okay, second scenario, where this condition is matching, when the request.query param.test equal to not null, so when query parameter called test is present in the request, then you go to the test backend target. Okay, the test one. So in the first one, you see only condition is there. There is no target endpoint. Second scenario, we have both conditions and target endpoint. Third one is the default. There is no condition required. So you just give the target endpoint. So if none of them are matching, this is the default one. You go to store backend like this. Okay. So that is how usually works. So within the route rule, condition also is optional. You see in the third one, there is no condition. So condition is also optional. And this target endpoint also is optional, because in the first one, you see there is no target endpoint, right? So you can define target endpoint condition based on the requirement. If there is no such requirement, you don't need to define, but still you have to mention route rule section, because that is what it will do. Okay, so that if there is nothing, it will at least go to the response of the proxy. It doesn't need to select target. Okay, so that is one thing. I hope this part is clear to you. And in
Yeah,
doubts,
yeah. Root rules good.
okay, now moving to target endpoint section. So right now in target endpoint, so if you remember, we gave the full backend URL, correct? Whatever was some backend full till whatever training DB, whatever full backend URL we give, right? Like usually, and we also saw, remember, whatever after the proxy base path, whatever comes, that is appended, right? That is the default behavior. So you can see this slide, right?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so let me. Yeah, so we saw that whatever comes after the base path, query parameter or path segment, by default, it is all forwarded to target. Now, so that is the usual flow. Now, one more thing here we have to see. Right now, we have hard coded the backend URL. Now, there can be one problem. You see, especially when we are if you know from our dev environment, right, when we are doing development, we usually call the dev environment of the backend, correct? From our QA environment, we call the QA environment of the backend. From our UAT environment, we call the UAT of the backend, and production will call the production, correct? So every time our environment will also usually backend will provide a corresponding environment, correct? They will have multiple environments on their side, which we will call, right? Now if we hard code this URL, and in the backend URL, usually the host and port number, that might change. Everything else remains same, because they will also deploy on their server, right? So only the server IP changes, right? IP changes means host might be different, their domain name might be different, their port number sometime they might be different port. Okay, and then this thing, but usually after the host and port, the remaining path usually will be same. Okay, so then question is, when we are changing, right? So when we change every time from our call to backend call, then problem comes is when problem comes every time you have to manually, after you do a test, correct? You do a test from one environment, you verify. After that, you have to manually go and manually update the backend host name and then deploy into other environment. So ideally, what is the code which is tested, right? The whatever code is that is tested, after testing, you should not need to modify anything, because if you don't modify, your QA might point to dev or something like this. Okay, so that could be a problem, right? Now, so that is the one of the issues. So for example, here in this example, you see your test will call, so here in one environment you are calling internal test something, and then other one it will be internal production, right? So now problem is that every time you change the code, this can lead to human error. Sometime what happened by mistake, if you know that people don't remember to um, change it, right? You cannot do a manual update. If you manually change, that problem that could happen is that in different environment, you can collect the wrong backend sometime, right? So what happens by mistake, sometime your non-production can connect to production backend, or your production can connect to non-production, correct? That could be a very much possibility. So this is called anti-pattern, because as per the standard practice, whatever you tested, okay, whatever you verified in one environment, that should be easily copied and put to other environment, basically promoted to higher environment without any code change. That is how any application, any software is supposed to work, right? But now because of this problem, hard coding problem, if you hard code, then it becomes mandatory for you to manually change, and that could create a problem. So how to overcome this? hard coding problem, how to remove this hard coding and make it a configurable. So what we do is, in order to avoid the hard coding, we create target server. It is known as named target server, but we simply call it target server. Okay, so target server is a configuration which contains the backend host name and backend port number, and if it is HTTPS, it will have the certificate also. Okay, so if there is a mutual TLS or something TLS, so some cases it can have certificate also. Okay, so the host name and port that will be specified in the I mean in the this thing. It will not have the path. Okay, it will not have the backend target base path. It will not have base path, only host, port, and if there is certificate required, it will have the certificate. Okay, that is what it has. So usually as we know, only the host and port, that is most of the time, that is the one which keeps changing. Backend will not change the base path, because target also will not change whatever is there in their open API spec. The target base path and all that will be same, right? Only the host name, because machine changes, so host name changes, because IP and host name changes. Okay, so that's all. So now so another benefit will be, so in many times we have 10 proxies. Okay, so in every proxy, if and backend will have the same environment, backend environment. In every proxy, you know that if my dev environment is connecting to the same backend dev environment for all the 10 proxies, you don't have to provide the URL 10 times, right? You don't have to hard code that URL on 10 times. Here with the target server, you only place it once, and one place you just create the configuration from your Apigee proxy, only give the name of the target server. Okay, so on the runtime, Apigee will resolve it. So when the call comes on the runtime, Apigee will resolve, okay, this target endpoint, okay, this is the backend host, this is the port and all, it will pick and it will go. So all the 10 proxies can refer to the same name. And another benefit will be, if there is any change on the backend host or port, so if the backend host changes, so they are doing a migration for some one server to different server and all, and changes from Apigee, you can easily make the change. So it will be a lot easy for you to change for the at one place. You don't have to go and change the 10 places, right? So that is the benefit. Okay. So now usually if you are using target server, so first this is a configuration we create from the UI. So in the environment level, we create target server, and what happens is, in the same name, so we will keep the same name. Remember, this name remains same. The same name will, in the test environment, it will point to the test backend. In production, it will point to production backend. Okay, so that way name remains same, because in Apigee code, in our Apigee proxy code, we give the name of the backend, right? So we give the name of the target server. So name of the target server remains same. Based on environment to environment, it keeps changing. Okay. So the host name changes. Sorry. So now this is usually in Apigee, you rather than hard coding this whole thing, okay, we just uh, replace it with the this URL will be replaced by the load balancer tag. In the load balancer tag, now you have this thing. In the load balancer tag, you see the server name of, it will have the name of the target server, and then as I told, the server only contains the host name, port number. It doesn't contain the uh, this thing, right? It doesn't contain the path. So the base path will be in the path section. So you use load balancer tag. In load balancer, you have the backend server host name, and then after that you have the path. So path will be sorry. So and path will be the base path. Whatever was the base path here, that will becomes the path. Okay. So that you replace the hard coded URL with the configured one. So that configuration changes from environment to environment. Okay. Now if this is, you just this name will be same, right? In each environment, this name will be same. So the same code which is tested on dev can easily be deployed to a higher environment. Okay, and you can carry on with your validation without worrying about any manual change. Okay, so that's, so now another thing is that we have this load balancer tag. So this is deliberately, because in Apigee, if backend is providing you multiple hosts, if backend says, in my dev environment or my test environment or my UAT production, I have multiple host name, they are replica of each other. Okay, sometimes they provide what you say region one, right? If you know, we have the multiple regions, right? Sometimes because of geolocation, they can see, okay, for my backend, I'm providing what you say resiliency or disaster recovery resiliency like this. Okay, so they can provide multiple regions, multiple hosts. Okay, and that is now becoming a bit more common practice. Previously it was not, but now if from Apigee, if there is a requirement that you have to connect with multiple host names of the backend for any environment. Okay, so then in that case, what you can do is you can have the load balancing there. So Apigee can do the load balancing. When I say load balancing, it can route to multiple hosts also of the same backend. For the same backend environment, if they are saying, okay, uh, one host is not able to handle all the calls, you need to do some routing like this. So that you can do a load balancing, means you can call backend one for one call, backend two. No, when I say backend is the server only, but every backend will be same. The environment will be same. So for dev environment, they will say I will have, for my dev environment, I will have one in say east region, one in west region. So you call me one call to east region, other call to west region like this. That can happen. For they can do disaster recovery, resiliency, and all those stuff, right? And internally, they will do the synchronizing of data like this. Okay.
Okay.
So, I mean, usually it is more relevant in production. Production I have seen, because production now there is a sometime requirement that production should be load balanced. Like there should be multiple host names that you might have to call. Many times, actually, I mean, one more thing is that many times there is already a global load balancer. They will use GLBs. Okay, the global load balancer can internally do the routing. We don't have to bother about that. That also is possible, but in very few projects I have seen that they manually provide, these are my 4 host names. Sometimes they will 2, sometimes they will go 3 4 like this. Okay, depending on their what is the requirement from their security team, resiliency, disaster recovery, and all those stuff. So they can provide you multiple geolocations. If one is down, at least other will continue serve traffic and all those stuff. So that way so you can, Apigee has this ability to do load balancing on the target. But many times, I mean, it is very rare, because many times they provide a GLB internally will take care of routing to multiple backend servers or multiple hosts. But Apigee also has it. So if backend is not using GLB and all, they've asked Apigee, you can do it. And so you can yeah, on the same environment you can connect to multiple host names, and then you can the Apigee provides you ability, and you can define the algorithm. By default it is like a round robin algorithm. So so like one call goes to backend host one, another call go to backend host two. That also, I mean, that is the usual, that is the default algorithm. But if you want to change, you can do change also. Okay, and then you can define max failure as a property. So here max failure means usually we don't use it. Okay, so thing is that if you want to if for example 5 consecutive times, if 5 consecutive times, let's say backend 2 is down, if 5 consecutive times backend 2 is not giving you response, okay, 5 times there is a failure in response. Okay, when I say failure, I mean, I'm talking about connection failure, not the like 400 500. Okay, backend gives me a 400 or 500 response, that is still okay. But I'm not able to reach, the connection is getting failed, connection drop out, or response is not coming, response is taking too long, so I'm getting timeouts. Basically I'm talking about timeout scenarios. If 5 consecutive times, for example, if you fail, then Apigee will take this backend out of service. Apigee will not transfer this. Okay, Apigee will only transfer to backend one. That kind of configuration you can do. Okay, in that
Okay.
case, now problem comes, Apigee will not know. So let's say backend 2 was down for 15 minutes, and within 15 minutes you tried, Apigee took this out of service. After 15 minutes, backend is 2 is back up, but Apigee will not know if backend 2 is automatically back up or not. So one option is that if you backend team tells you my backend server is up, so you can start transferring. One option will be you can restart, you have to restart Apigee message processors, or you have to redeploy the proxies. That is a big no in production. You cannot do that in production, right? As you know, redeployment and all those stuff. So second option is using health monitor. Health monitor will continue to hit the backend. Okay, they will periodically hit the backend, and it will check if the do a basically health check. So if backend is up or not, so it will continue to ping. Okay, it will ping, it will, if it get response, means backend is back up. So if you are using max failure, you have to use the health monitor, so that when the backend is up, health monitor will auto detect, okay, the backend is up, and it will start routing traffic. So that is the options that Apigee has to bring it back. However, as I mentioned, we very rarely you might have to use this. Most of the time, you will use as a global load balancer, GLBs and all. That GLBs internally do the routing and all. And in for GLB also, these the cloud services and all, they provide multiple host names internally. So GLB also, if one GLB is down, they will internally take care of routing to another GLB instance like this. Okay, so that those people can automatically do that. Okay, so we don't have to bother about. But yeah, only in some projects I have seen, especially for big enterprise where they have all these things and all, and they wanted to just ensure that you are routing to multiple data centers. So if they have multiple data centers, you route to them. That is one way, but it is very rare. For most of the time, the GLBs and all. Okay, now in the target endpoint we have certain properties. So these properties can be controlled by us programmatically if we want to make any change. So some of the important properties is like connect.timeout.millis. So it will tell you within how much time you can try to connect. So by default the connection timeout is like 30 seconds. So Apigee will try to connect for 30 seconds to some backend server. If it is not able to connect, Apigee will fail. If it will give connection timeouts. Okay, and then it is also another one is IO timeouts. IO is like from request to response. So when you send the request to backend, from within from the time you send till you finally get the response, within that time, the default is 55 second. Okay, so that is so that the idea is that that should be yeah. So if you want to reduce that, you can reduce. Most of the time we can reduce it so that you don't have to wait for 55 seconds, because your consumer who is making the call at mobile app or web application, it cannot just keep showing the progress bar for 1 minute. Sometime when you know that the backend is because if the connection has to happen, connection can happen within few seconds itself, right? So that is the idea. So you don't have to wait. So if you want to reduce those time limits and all, and you know that if your backend is like very fast, you get a response in 1 second, 2 second, you don't need to wait for 55 seconds. So that's the idea. So if you want to reduce those for improvement of the consumer experience or client experience, so that they don't have to wait for 1 minute and all, keep showing the progress bar on the app and whatever, so you can reduce them also. So that is possible. Okay, so you can control the property from here. Apigee, the system level, the default is 30 and 55 second. You both options are there. If you are working with high payload and everything, you can increase also. But if you are know that, okay, if you know that you backend response is not going to take much time, then if you want to reduce, you can reduce as well. Okay, and some other properties, all these properties are there in Apigee. Has this give me a second. uh, uh, so endpoint properties. So yeah, this endpoint property is it will tell you what all the properties that you can set in the target and proxy endpoint both. Okay, so proxy endpoint also you have certain properties, target endpoint also you have certain properties. So all these properties are given. Okay, so that you can use and you can refer. Okay, so let me ping you this link so you can save this also. This is like very useful. Sometime
Sure.
if you have to make any change, this can be quite useful. So in the sending in the chat here, in that training chat, so you can make a note of this. Okay, so this link is very important. So yeah, I hope you have set it by now.
Yeah, good.
Okay, now so moving to the next thing. So this lab we will do. So that is the next lab we have to do. So lab let's do tomorrow. We'll just spend today. It might, this lab also might take a little bit more time, and so
Yeah, we'll do tomorrow lab.
so, but before lab, we just have to cover a few things. Also, for this lab too, there is a supplemental lab also. Okay, so that when you get time, you can do on your own. You just have to follow. So let me show you here. If I see in the lab, okay, in the lab there are like 12, 13 labs here. There is a supplemental also. You see this one, Apigee Engineer supplement
Supplemental.
supplemental
Yeah.
lab. So 2A
Yeah.
for out rule, 2B for trace tool. So when you get time, you can do this 2A and 2B on your own.
Okay.
Just follow the steps you last time we did, right? So just have to follow this one. Okay, you
Okay.
can do on
Mm-hmm.
your own. If case you face any problem, or if you need anything, then you can let me know later on. Okay, so we have a couple of supplemental also which you can try on your own. But before we do the labs, just a few things here, a few things on this slide for some properties and all that is important to understand about load balancing. So I told you about this uh, algorithm. So algorithm, as I said, the least connection is the one. I mean, we use the by default is the round robin. Then another one is least connection. So based on the open connections, based on the connection with the backend, whichever backend has the least connection open, it will use that, so that it is becoming, it is faster, and one backend doesn't have too many connections, right? So that is one option. Second one is then weighted algorithm. In weighted, what happens, you define what, like a 3 call to 1, 1 call to 2, like this, or 4 call to 1, 1 call to 2, like this. Okay, so that way you can define which one to give more weightage. So if you know that some backend is more high configuration server, so you can give more weightage to that, and then lower configuration. And then there is another flag called retry enable true. So thing is that if backend 2 is down, let's say if backend 2 is down and you are getting connection or a timeout failure, so if you are getting timeouts from backend 2, and if your retry enable true is true, then it will retry the call with backend 1. So it will use the backend 1 in that case. So if backend 2 gives timeout, it will use backend 1. Remember, this is only for failures of the timeout. Okay, it is not for a error condition. So if backend 2 provides you 400 error, 402 error, or 500 error, whatever error scenario, then it will simply, it will, because error is also a response, correct? So only in case of response failure, it will go to other backend. Okay, so usually when we are having load balancing, we usually keep the retry enabled as true. So if one is giving uh, failure, other will be up. Okay, so and this we already discussed. So usually I am usually when we are using multiple backends, okay, multiple servers, target this thing, we will keep the max, we will not use the max failure flag. Reason being, because I mean, sometimes as we don't know, I mean, so usually most of the time where I have worked on, we don't use max failure flag, because then obviously you don't care, because in that case Apg will not take it out of service, and you can see retry enabled as true. So if one gives error, it will try the second one, it will get response, provide it back. So that way you can do it. So you don't need to keep max failure flag altogether, because then because it becomes mandatory to use your health monitor. Otherwise, if you don't use health monitor, your server will be up and you will never know, Apg will not try. So that is the problem. So you know, and if you are using max failure, then you have to configure health monitor. But backend teams might not sometime provide you option for health monitoring. So for health monitor, there is like one option is to use TCP monitor. So you can define the interval. So periodically APG will keep pinging the backend. So APG will keep pinging the backend host names and will try to open a TCP connection. Okay, you have to give the host name will be there anyways, and you have to provide the port number for TCP connection, and it will try to open a connection there on that port. If it is able to open a TCP connection, it will be fine. Okay, if not, then it will increment the it will yeah, retry in some time. So that way it will do a TCP monitoring. Second is HTTP monitor. In HTTP monitor, what happens sometimes, so if backends are sometime backend servers, they will give one hard coded API. So backend will provide some pre-configured hard coded API. That hard coded API will only give you 200 OK. Just it is called health check APIs. Okay, sometimes they provide a health check API, so that you call the health check API with some whatever, some header, some security header, auth header, username, password, whatever, and they will only give 200. It is not going to do it is not a functional API, it is just a health check. Okay, so you make a call and it will just give you 200 OK like this. Okay, so that way you can so that way you will just get to know if the backend is up or not, if the backend server is up or not. So that will, so if this service works, then obviously other service will also work. So that also is there, but for that backend team has to give you the URLs, and they have to configure some, yeah, security whatever and everything. So that is there. So but it is usually very rare that backend will have all these health monitoring and all enabled. So that is why configuring the health monitor sometimes becomes very tricky, because backend team might not be supportive. So usually for that reason, if in case anyways, if you are using these multiple target servers, this thing or load balancing, then usually we just keep retry enabled as true. So if one is timing out, it will go to other times out, go to first, like this. Okay. And so that is the usual practice. But as I told, it is very rare to use this thing. Mostly backend will have GLBs and all. We don't have to bother. Now in load balancing, Apigee also has a fallback server option. Now what is fallback? Fallback is never called in normal scenario. Normal API request, fallback will never be called. Only if all the other servers are down. Okay, if all the non-fallback, basically normal server, all the standard servers are down, then only Apigee will call the fallback server. So that is one another option that Apigee provides. So uh, that you can configure if there is a requirement. But usually the backend teams will not take care of all those, because they have to support infra, correct, on multiple servers and all. Usually they don't care about all these things. So we don't have to use multiple load balancing and multiple host name. Most of the time you will only use one, and internally backend will manage the load balancing internally. We don't have to bother about that. Okay. So yeah, that completes our chapter number 3 theoretical bit. So tomorrow same time we can connect and do the lab. Okay. And then and then that will complete our chapter number 3. So Monday onwards we can start with chapter 4. Okay.
Sure. Okay.